I do want you to meet Ezequiel Escobar Bellshaw. Yes, give him a big hand. Our students on study abroad last year went to Spain and met Ezequiel and his family. His mother, Fiona, is doing a workshop tomorrow. She's the founder of Fiat, the organization that Ezequiel is going to tell you about. Ezequiel is an attorney. He is the father of a little girl and a little boy, so this is very personal for him. And I interviewed him for our podcast last year. Please check it out, share that. I'm not going to read his whole MBA, but besides a law degree, he also has an MBA, a master's in business. And I believe that in this field, understanding the laws of supply and demand are important in how we develop a crosswalk that gives us access but keeps us safe. I'd like to introduce to you Ezequiel Escobar Bellshaw.
Well, good morning.
Good morning.
From sunny Spain to sunny California, so that's good. I feel like home. And thank you to the Global Center for Women and Justice for this privilege and responsibility to be speaking here today in this wonderful conference. And thank you to my dear friend, Dr. Sandy Morgan, and of course, as well, the President, Michael Bailey. I really enjoyed meeting him yesterday. And for me, is this topic is not just a random topic. It's not at all a random topic. It's something that is affecting us and has changed our world. So I would like to start and asking you, what do you see? I met a few of you with great skills, capacities, and you're dedicating all of your efforts and knowledge to fight human trafficking and to help victims to have a new life opportunity. And my question is, what do you see? How do you describe your context? And why I'm asking this is because I would like to start from that question. But before we go ahead, I'd like to introduce a little bit more about my work, so you have a little context about it. As Sandy said, I'm the executive director of Fiat, which is an NGO that works in Spain since 2009. And we have an expertise, we are recognized as an expert organization that works against human trafficking and helps women, the frame that is established by the European Union. And also in Spain, we are present in 5 regions, and we have residential care facilities, teams of detections, psychologists, social workers, educators, lawyers, that all of them give an holistic care to the woman for the purpose of bringing them a new opportunity of life. Today, we are attending more than 1,500 women and 200 children, and we are looking for much more. It's not about the numbers, it's about the transformation. It's about changing lives. It's about not rescuing, but changing their context. So when we see a victim, what we actually need to see is an empowered, restored life. And that is what actually motivates us to do our work. So now you have more context. And I'd like to go to the next slide to show you, and I have here mine. Yeah, I love this, thank you. Here you go. This picture shows us what we normally see when we talk about gender violence. And I say gender violence because human trafficking for sexual exploitation, for example, in Spain, we see that 98% of the victims are women. Therefore, we can affirm that there's a perspective of gender violence when we talk and address human trafficking, right? Because if 98% of the victims are women, therefore, it is a problem of women being exploited because of the demand of prostitution run by men. Okay? So normally when we address and we respond the question, what do I see? I see a perpetrator and I see the victim. If you are an investigator or a police officer, probably you will see how to prosecute the crime and how to put the bad guys in jail. This is better. I know that I'm explaining this in a very simple way, but your perspective of what you're seeing is, how can I find out who is doing this bad? How can I find out where the perpetrator is? How can I prove and bring evidences about a crime that has been committed? And this traditional perspective affects our way of thinking. And in my experience, providing help, also help as a consultant, I found out that many of the issues that organizations have with results and processes to help victims of human trafficking, and when they struggle with results or they struggle with processes, the problem is not the operational part of it. The problem is their vision. The problem is that the environment and the ecosystem is not well defined. So my question again is, what do you see? Because now, this is the old way of seeing the core of this ecosystem, the very core of the environment, where we find the perpetrator and the victim. Nowadays, we have a new way to relate with each other. We have a new way to communicate. In the early 2000s, I remember a book that helped me a lot in my work, which is The Balanced Scorecard by Dr. Norton and Dr. Kaplan of Harvard University. And they talked already about the era of information. I don't know if you heard that, but like 20 years ago, people were talking about the era of information. And it was all because of the internet. But nowadays, people talk about the digital era. It's not just the information era, it's the digital era. And technology and the digital world has accelerated times. So things change immediately. Whatever you have today will be updated tomorrow. If you don't update your computers every single week, you won't be able to use your software. Years ago, you can buy a dryer machine and it would work for 20 years. Now, if it works for 5 years, you are very lucky. It's a problem. Now, that is not just affecting a way of living daily, like buying things, being in the market, but also the way we see things and how we relate to each other. I want to show you this picture. This is a wonderful family, isn't it? They look all happy and together. But for me, it's the expression of a terrible drama. Have you ever been in a restaurant with friends and see what is going on in the table? I love this because you are all looking at me. But normally, if we were in a restaurant and I was a waiter here, I remember, I worked as a waiter to pay my studies for a little while, and I remember by then that people would pay more attention to the cell phone than myself. And now, this has changed even more. So you have a father with a laptop, a mother with an iPad, and 2 kids to with two wonderful cell phones. And they are all together smiling, but actually, even if they are together, like in the restaurant, you have people that are together but are more connected with people in distance. And that is because of the digital era. So now, my question is, what do you see? You saw the picture before. We had the perpetrator and the victim. Yeah, here we go. But now, I'm going to tell you something that is uncomfortable, but you are as well in the core of this ecosystem of human trafficking. And again, I'm going to tell you why. I love this topic, keeping our children safe, because it provides us a new vision of the world, provides us the capacity of having analysis and understanding what is going on actually when we talk about human trafficking. Because human trafficking is a massive issue. It's massive. More than 48 million of people are slaves today. And this is what we can tell by the numbers. And this reality, social reality, has collided with another massive reality, which is the new way of communication, digital world. So if you combine these two social realities, we have a super massive issue. And if we don't change our perspective of reality, we will have problems with results and processes. Not because we don't understand the operational area, but because we are not seeing the issue properly. So this is a story of a man that had a problem with his computer, right? And he was struggling during hours and hours to make it work, but it didn't work at all. So finally, he said, I'm gonna call the man of computers. He looked and he called a technician. And this man came and helped him to make the computer work after more than 5 hours. And he said, sir, your problem is the computer was unplugged. So sometimes we don't need to look at the software and the hardware. Probably it's because our vision and the very first things we need to analyze, the ecosystem, describe your context, is, we have some issues with that. So as I said, I love this topic, but I also like to start with this intervention and my presentation, providing you information and grounds that I think it will help to go ahead during this conference and through this conference. And I'm saying this because I saw the wonderful guests that you have, the wonderful speakers that you invited, and I think that you will exit from that doors when the last day comes in a different way that you came in, and that's good news. And I really hope that all this presentation will add value to you and will help you to see the world in a different way, so we can have information and then knowledge to make good decisions. Good? Okay. So if we are now in a new environment, and you can see how parents, how educators, even in schools, they're giving tablets to kids. Now we are part of the ecosystem. We're not just observers from the distance. We are inside. And that has changed also how the perpetrators of human trafficking work, how the victims are affected. And I would like to talk about a new scenario for the victims. You will see different data and surveys that I used for this presentation here. And I like also to show you this picture where you see how addictive can be also a cell phone, but all the problems that we have beyond a cell phone, a computer, a tablet. So this is only data of America. It's a year ago, and you will find out that as March of 2023, they found out more than 200 forums with content of sexual exploitation, but not just sexual exploitation, we're talking about children here. And this is happening in what is called the Tor network. The Onion Route is one of the main networks used in America to share adult content, sexual content of and specifically child exploitation, sexual exploitation. So now we are talking about, and that is why in many documents and papers that you will see published presently, you will start to hear what is called virtual enslavement and virtual slavery. It's because now that is happening a lot. Children that access to platforms like video games platforms, playing Fortnite, playing FIFA, for example, which is a soccer game, and go into private chats and forums that provides privacy, not just for the users, but for the criminal organizations. And through that, the children are exploited. I will show you different cases across the world. But for me, this was very impacting. This is happening in America now. And see how more than 200,000 members in one website, this is 200 forums, right? In one of these websites of the Tor network, only in 4 weeks, there were more than 200,000 members. It's not that huge. The problem is now, again, what do we see? Can we see that? So the context for the victims is completely different. It's not like years ago when you talk about something tangible. Now exploitation also happens through untangible channels, like digital world. Social media. I'm sure that you all are in Facebook, Instagram, probably you use Snapchat, and many other ways. So I already talked to you about the Tor, which is the Onion Route, is one of the main websites network in America to exchange digital content of sexual abuse and child exploitation. But you see that this all is connected also with social media, and I will talk about those cases later. But I want just to give you a big image. This is January 2024, actually, that is a mistake, my mistake. We see that only Facebook, we have more than 3 billion users, active users. This is huge. And the thing is, children find a way to go through WhatsApp, YouTube, private chat rooms, and we are now finding out that many victims are being trafficked because of this. So in Spain, more than 90% of the victims of human trafficking are not locals, comes from other countries of the EU. Especially now, the main route is from Latin America, Colombia, Venezuela, and Paraguay. And almost of all these women that we attend, and minors that we find out as well, they've been trafficked through social media. So that is already happening. Because it's very easy for the traffickers to go through social media, connect with somebody in an open world, and go through the vulnerability of the victim, offering a good job position, pay a flight ticket, and when the woman and the child come to the country, they found out that the story is completely different. And they are already in the sexual exploitation context. So social media is huge. I just wanted to give you these pictures for you to see this is active users, no regular users. So this is huge number. We also see how pornography has changed. I love what President Bales said about, and the image he showed about the pipe. When a society doesn't confront and address their main issues, that society is normalizing the issue. And we have a huge issue now in our world. Its name is pornography. These are the most popular websites worldwide. This is recent, November 2023. And you can see how Pornhub and Xvideos are in the top 5. You have more visitors online through the WhatsApp to Pornhub than Twitter.com. Billions of visits. I will go ahead with some information that we'll exchange with you, but we participated in an investigation in Spain in the 17 different regions we have in our country. And we found out that children get their sexual education mainly through pornography. And now you can see that the numbers match. And I'm not talking here about applications. I'm talking about website. So in that investigation that I will talk to you about later, we found out that the cookies and the algorithms found that they could find in the investigation that the top moment of people consuming pornography was about 8 p.m., which is the time that children have lunch with their parents. A typical thing like, I already finished my food, Dad. Mom, can I go with my tablet? Or can I play with the cell phone? They say, yeah, you go. Well, we see a correlation here. I will talk about that later. But I think we need to think about what we are seeing today. And this is data from the last report of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Okay? This is also only in America. And this is only the surface, because it's data that was found out. It's what investigators and law enforcement could find out. And this is the data. Do you remember I talked to you before about the Tor route and the Tor network? This is data that was found out in the Tor network, in the Onion route in America. These 200 forums that were open during years and cannot be closed because of the privacy and because of all the data protection system that is used beyond these networks. We found out, or the law enforcement in America found out, you see all the details in this table, that the content of 35 million of files of children being abused. 35 million. And this is only in 2021, because the paper was published in 2023, but the data that was shown is from 2021. So we are talking about almost 2 million videos of sexual exploitation of children shared in the Tor network, and almost 35 million of pictures, images. And all in one of these forums, we had in this country more than 200,000 members in 4 weeks. Many of you come from different organizations, and you know how difficult it is to get funds for our fight against human trafficking. Can you imagine if you get 200,000 donors in 4 weeks? So the truth is, this Tor network is affecting. In fact, I will show you more later about global numbers, and you will see that those numbers are almost even bigger. But however, I want to show you again how the environment has changed since 2014. So the findings in 2014 are practically zero. But now, in 2021, we see how the numbers are that high. So the digital age has changed in a way that sexual exploitation happens online in a different way. It's not the same than before. It's not happening the same way. And that is affecting also the perpetrators. We talked about the victims that are in that situation. Something that happened to us is that we realized that human trafficking was changing during the pandemic. We were declared as public interest during the pandemic, and that allows us during the lockdown to go out to the street and go into the apartments for the first time. So in Spain, our context, we used to see that prostitution used to happen normally in the streets, areas, some neighborhoods, in the streets, and also in clubs, what we call clubs. But because of the pandemic, there was a trend that started to happen a little bit before, that was that victims and the women that were under prostitution would go through private apartments. With the pandemic, all that was accelerated, and we started to see that almost all prostitution happened in private apartments. And we started to see how things changed suddenly, just like that. And we also started to see not just changes in the way of how sexual exploitation is happening, and how also traffic is happening through online, but also we started to see how more young boys of 18, 19 years old will go to apartments and ask for sexual services. I had a chat with my colleague, with one of the public prosecutors of the Supreme Court in Spain recently, and we were talking about this data that I'm showing you here. In 5 years, the sexual assaults committed by minors in our country has soared in 116%. That is crazy. And I know what it is to go to a police department and a police delegation and see the office, plenty of boys and girls that has been exploited, trying to make a statement, and how those cases go dismissed because of the lack of resources or because of the lack of evidence. So what I'm saying here is this is just the top of the iceberg, because what we saw before about the National Center for I forgot the translation in English, missing and exploited children. That is also only what we can see. It's not an indicator of what is going on. At the same time, the numbers of statements that in one country can be made is not an indicator of sexual exploitation in the country. That is an indicator of the effectiveness of law enforcement. Because you can be in a country with a lot of sexual exploitation with very few denouncers, and you cannot see the number of denouncers as an indicator of sexual exploitation in the country. But in this case, if we see that the number of denouncers and the cases of sexual assault increases 116% in 5 years, it means that something huge is happening. It's not that some data is changing. It's not that some things in our era are changing. It's that our era has changed and we couldn't notice it. Why I'm saying this? Because we are talking about protecting our children. Do you remember the first picture? Traditional perspective. But we need to protect our children as well of being perpetrators. Because this is what is breaking my heart. That a child of 10 years old has normalized sexual assault. In 2020 and 2023, the assaults in schools were multiplied per 5 times, respect 2022. And all this is because of all these massive social media I showed you before, all these porn websites I showed you before. So I don't want to alarm you. I just want to provide you more information in what you see. So you open your heart and your mind in order to approach your work in a different way. I had some difficulties to access. I have a really good database where I use a lot to go into and find out surveys and download papers and all this kind of information. And what I could find was from 2020, the American Psychology Association already published a paper of an investigation, a survey, that said that children start to consume in America pornography at the age of 12 and 13 years old. I saw other papers that were not official, so that is the reason I didn't publish. I didn't, put those in my presentation. But the years that we are talking now, 4 years later, is that age tends to decrease. In Spain, and we participated in that investigation, the average age is 8 years old. So a boy of 8 years old normally had already the experience of seeing sexual abuse from pornography. Do you remember the pipe? It's affecting their imagination. Their pre-cortex has not been fully developed. They don't have the capacity, as Dr. Morgan said, of distinguish if this is right or not. Can you imagine? I know that this is difficult to ask, but I need to do this. It's my responsibility. Can you imagine your son or daughter of 8 years old accessing, without you knowing it, to sexual content in a porn website like Pornhub, where you can see 4 guys forcing a woman to have sex, and she playing the role that she even likes it? That is happening already. 12 years old is alarming, super alarming. 8 years old is a catastrophe. Another survey, the children that were interviewed, more than 1,500 children, which is a good data to offer the statistic. 41% of the children that said that they had access to pornography more than once said that they watch pornography in school, during school time. Isn't that insane? 41% reported that, of 1,500 children that were interviewed. So the thing is that we started to be worried in Fiat Because we started to see, as I told you, that after the pandemic, more young men would come to us for sexual services. So we were alarmed with a quantity problem. But when we went to the quality data, we started to see the perversion that they were asking for. This is just an example that we see this in these different regions we work across our country. Before the pandemic, we used to see how pregnant women, in context of sexual exploitation, would stop for a little while to be in context of prostitution because they would have to deliver the child and that would be a problem for the business, right? Normally, a woman that gets pregnant in context of sexual exploitation in our country would be forced to get an abortion or to have their child and have a little while of no exploitation, even if they are exploited, however. But after the pandemic, because the request of the youngest customers, I don't like to use that word, we've seen how if you are pregnant, that increases the value for the criminal organization. Because young people now are starting to pay more if they can pay for a pregnant woman. And we are seeing that daily and daily and daily. That is a problem that has a source, is that the generation of boys and girls of 18 and 19 years old that we have seen after the pandemic is the first generation in our history that has been sexually educated through digital porn. Before, the previous generations had access when they were teenagers to digital porn, but this is the first time that a child can have access to digital porn. Therefore, they normalized some forms of behavior and sexual behavior. And that has been manifested through the way they are asking for prostitution services. And many of these guys go to the apartments of prostitution using the algorithms of Pornhub. Now in Spain has been forbidden by law, but we've seen how many of them went through the publicity. So they go into a video of Pornhub and they would say, would you like to have, this kind of sex with somebody in your area? And they would click and get into the phone number, to right number phone, in a closed area of less than 2 miles away from its place because of the cookies that are given and given their location, and they would pay for service just like they saw that in the video. Now that has changed, that's right. But again, what do we see? So we need to go beyond, and we need to define well our environment, our ecosystem. So the perpetrators changed as well, and we are seeing how children that consume pornography, when on online pornography, are now perpetrators of these crimes. And the problem is our criminal laws are not prepared for this. Because we cannot ask criminal responsibility to a boy of 10 years old. And we're talking about very, very serious crimes here. Gallup published the report in 2023 and showed data about America again. And the average is that teenagers in America spend per day 4.8 hours in social media. Per day. If teenagers dedicate that to study, they will be Einsteins. This will be like we are back in America in the 40s, right? Where we have all these great, physicians and minds. So they spend almost 5 hours. And that shows us reality of the previous picture I showed you about the new environment, where you see a man with a laptop, a man with an iPad, and two kids with cell phones. My question now is, how do you think that is affecting them? Because I can tell you something for certain. A parent cannot know 5 hours of daily content in social media of its own child. It's not possible. Especially when what I told you is the main way now to traffic children and to traffic women in the world, and also the main way to see virtual exploitation. I would like to talk to you about these cases. I don't know if you heard about Baksa or God before. If somebody did, can you raise your hand? No? Okay. This is one of the most worldwide cases, non-worldwide cases about what I talked to you before, virtual slavery or enslavement. This was done through what is called NTH rooms, which is practically very similar to what is the Tor network. And it happened in South Korea in 2020. So, do you remember when everybody was saying WhatsApp is not good? Download Telegram. But now I'm going to tell you something. Telegram is one of the best ways for criminal organizations to traffic women and children. And I'm going to explain you why in this case. So, what happened is that these two kids, because we're young boys, were using Telegram through a kind of Tor network or forum, that is the NTH room. And what they did is to go through social media. You remember the numbers before about social media and the time that a child spends, a teenager spends in social media. So they went into the social media and got teenagers. And the way of approaching them was to connect with something that visibly they had interest in. For example, sports, or if they saw they were in vulnerability, a job offer. And one of them would provide a link to click, and through that would hack the whole system, access to their data and private information, and use that to force them to exchange data of sexual exploitation. Then naked, things like that, and then the content would be more pervert, even a bit more. And the other one, what it would do is to get, they managed to get a picture of the victim with her ID. Like that, photograph. And through that, it would use that information to force them all again to do the sexual exploitation. We're talking about hundreds of victims. They charged them with those charges, but there were actually 100 victims behind it. And none of their parents knew about it. And they were exploited during 2 years. And nobody knew about it. And this is something that I want to tell you. Don't believe all that is said about privacy. If privacy is good for users, privacy is also good for criminal organizations. So if Telegram is good for your kid because you say they're not gonna share anything bad, don't be cheated by that idea. Because the truth is they can go to private chat rooms and things like that could happen. So we see how 26 girls were exploited with 3,762 videos. Can you imagine the average of that? Per child, per girl. More than 100 videos against their will. And all of that was done through the NTH rooms, which is, again, a private chat that goes through a website network with thousands of users. And this is something that I want to talk to you about, is the abolitionist position. The abolitionist position defends that the problem is not only the perpetrator, but the source of this market, which is the demand of prostitution. What is known as the client, I don't like that name, as the demander of services. The thing is, all the users, we are talking about hundred thousand users in the NTH rooms, were using that, and if you see and watch the chat box, you'd be horrified about what they were saying. I want this content, ask her to do this. Until the point that many of these girls were not just sexually exploited in the videos, but also they made them do things like licking the toilet, naked, with a selfie. Things like that. So the perversion, because of what we saw before, is this real? Is a real pipe that affected a full generation, a whole generation, and my heart is broken because we missed probably a generation already without noticing it. We need to transform a generation. We need to make things differently. That is why I love the rich model that you have here in Global Center for Women Justice. Today we're doing a little bit of research, getting information. I'm worried about what is going to happen to the next generation. Because I think that is true what has been said before, that a new generation will rise and do things better than we did. That is our hope. But the truth is that probably we are not addressing the problem of how to protect our children and keeping them safe from, online, because we couldn't see what is going on online. And I'm worried about these minors that are committing sexual assault even more times. And how all this data is increasing, and what can we do about it? So one thing I want to encourage you about, and I'm coming back again to the question, what do you see? That is not the same having information than having knowledge. So I'm sure that probably Dr. Morgan agrees with me that sometimes you see a lot of good-hearted people, organizations who start to do things, but sadly sometimes they commit more harm than help because they had no idea what they were doing. They were misinformed. And human trafficking is so delicate, and sexual exploitation is so delicate, that if we do an intervention in it without understanding the context, probably will do more harm than help. But if all in this room we have an equalized information, and we can say that we have the same information, the difference of our decisions won't be because of the information that we have, but because of the knowledge. So we need to transform information into knowledge. And that is about what President Bell said before. Thinking. And I know that I came in this presentation with a lot of information. But I invite you in this conference to transform that information into knowledge, so you can make smart decisions. Because now it comes the question, what will we do about it? This is overwhelming. I understand that. This is overwhelming for me. In the investigation I talked to you about before, the survey, that one that I talked to you about of children of 8 years old consuming pornography, we found out that teachers, educators were in the 6th line of information. This means that you have different lines of information for the kids and children. Pornography was number 1, social media number 2, chat rooms number 3, and if you want to go and arrive where educators are, number 6. And if you want to know where the parents are, number 7. So, my message is now we have the information translated into knowledge, but let's work so educators and parents are number 1. We need to go ahead of this. And the way of going ahead of this is addressing this in schools, at homes, and talking about it, because don't be afraid that your child will be surprised. They already are watching it probably. We need to do something about it. And this is also a message about legislation. We always talk about modifying administrative normatives and criminal code. Let me tell you something, the criminal code doesn't educate nobody. It punishes. Twice. Yeah? So, the truth is, sanctions won't change the problem. That is why I like the benchmark of the Nordic and Swedish abolitionist position. The good results they got wasn't because they started to sanction. Of course, that is needed. Sanction, what we call someone's called the customers, sanctioning the perpetrator. But the difference is if we start to educate and to talk about these issues, and to understand that through video games platforms, children can access to private chats that will put them in danger. And to talk about the implications of sex and some behaviors in early ages. And this is education. And that is why I want to share this message now. We need to transform our generation. Because we are seeing now the consequences of a generation that was transformed without us noticing it, and what can happen in hidden screens. But the good news is if people like you came to a place like this, it's because you are willing to do that. And I want to close this with hope, which is the last letter of the rich model, right? And say that we can do it. And I want just to open your hearts and minds for the rest of the conference to continue to, to have information, knowledge. But again, now think about your environment, define again your ecosystem, and think about this. What do you see? Thank you very much.
Minutes for Q&A. If you are on Slido, some of you already have, and I know we don't have enough time to answer these questions, but Ezequiel is here for 2 days. He's going to be in another plenary, he's going to be in a workshop. But these questions today are disturbing, much like Ezequiel's presentation. And our next presentation is with our virtual presenter from National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. So just don't get too comfortable. One of the questions And I know we can't answer this, but I think we need to hear the questions from right here in the room, and start looking at the answers. I didn't get the talk, and my school didn't have health, so that led for me at 12 to start looking online. How can we start telling parents to have that talk? I think you already told us that we have to do that. Another, how can you get help if you are being affected by unwanted porn use because of starting at such a young age? How do I fix myself?
Okay, that's a good question. I think, and we are seeing that, and our psychologists in our NGO are working on that too. I think that some porn can cause trauma as well. It is difficult to say this, but normally aggressors that commit sexual assault, they are victims of a virtual trauma that happen in an intangible way through porn. So I think that psychologists that work with children need to get updated on this too. Because only through that approach, this will be, you can get proper help, because this is about behavior. And not it's only for educators and parents, but I think also psychologists need to get aware of this issue so they can help people that start at very early ages to consume porn, and especially if that porn affected them in the way of having, behaving with others. So that is what I think you need to do.
There's several questions about how we help parents with home strategies, how parents can bring this information into their schools. Advice for that, we only have 3 more minutes for Q&A. We're going to have coffee and then our next plenary.
Good. Well, I remember in Madrid that Dr. Brenda Navarrete, which happens to be part of Bangor University and the Global Center for Women and Justice, shared precisely about this. And I loved it so much. So I'm so sorry, but I will use some of her words. Sorry, Brenda, if you see this, this is yours. But the truth is that I think you already have some, especially in this university, you already have good information about it and materials about how to start to talk to children when they are at the age of 3, 4, 5 years old about how to respect your privacy, intimacy, how to talk about sex but in a healthy way, how to behave with somebody else. So this is something typical. I don't know if that happens here, but in Spain, people would say, oh, I have a new boyfriend, a new girlfriend. And you're talking about a boy, a girl of 4 years old. How to address those things? So I think these questions need to be addressed very soon as they start to relate with others, and that they already have good materials and content here.
3 of our adjuncts, including Dr. Navarrete that Ezequiel mentioned, and also Ruthie and Kendra, they're both here, did an online Smart Mamas Save Kids to help you figure out how to start talking to your kids from the time they're little, 3 years old, maybe even 2, all the way through adolescence. So we've got some resources for you. Last question. How do we deprogram our kids if they had early exposure?
Okay, that's a really good question. As I said before, I see this like somebody that had experienced trauma. It's not exactly from a point of science the same thing. But if you don't treat this with proper and professional help, it will be practically impossible, because they already normalized a way of behavior. So my response to that would be to get professional help. We have really good psychologists, I'm sure in this room as well, but with the right knowledge, understanding of the ecosystem, the environment. I think it is like treating a trauma, because a kid has normalized since very early ages a terrible way of behaving with others.
This is, I think, the hardest conference we've ever done. Our introduction here is somewhat overwhelming, and we need to take a deep breath. It has a purpose, because we need to find how to design a crosswalk that will keep this monster away and keep our children safe. We have it's on my program that I have to dismiss you now. And at first I thought, we've got to keep this conversation going, but actually we need to come up for air.